Hello, Prime Media audiences. This is your host, Ladette Muleta, joining you from Washington, D.C. today. I am here with a special guest. His name is Sebastian Perimoni. Sebastian is joining us from Paris, France. Sebastian, welcome to Prime Media. We are delighted to have you. Thank you for taking your time and joining us today. I'm going to give a chance to Sebastian to give us a background about himself and tell us a little bit about himself first. Sebastian, please take the lead and give us a little background about yourself.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to be able to speak to the Ethiopian population, which is a very beautiful country. And so I am Sebastian Perimoni. Yes, I am working on a political analysis. I have a website which is called www.afriquedufutur.com, which is Africa of the Future. And I wrote a book about the future of Africa, which is based on the development policy, infrastructures, space policy, nuclear policy, railway. And that's why I dedicate a part of my book to the Ethiopian industrial policy with the Great Dam, the railway, the space policy of Ethiopia, and so on and so forth. That's why Ethiopia is a very important country in terms of a model of industrial development. So I write a lot of articles, publish books, and different analyses on the future of Africa.
Great. Thank you, Sebastian. So a lot is going on in Ethiopia right now. Ethiopia is basically on the news consistently, it seems like. What are your thoughts about what's going on in Ethiopia right now?
First of all, I have to say that we stand here in France, the population, alongside the Ethiopian people who are the first to suffer from this conflict going on in Ethiopia. And as it was said during the Prime Minister of his press briefing, according to the National Disaster Risk Management Commission, we have already more than 1 million people displaced in the northern region in Ethiopia due to this conflict. So it is the population which is suffering first of this situation, and that's why the conflict has to stop as quickly as possible. So we are alongside with the Ethiopian people, so it has to be said. Secondly, we have also to say that there is from the West a kind of rhetoric of doom fueled by the international community who are asking their people to go back home. You know, France has done that, saying you have to go back home, the situation is chaotic, everything will collapse. So they are creating fears, you know, regarding the situation, but it's much more a disinformation campaign. It's much more psychological warfare and propaganda, which is going on in the West media, coming from some think tank and people in the government already calling, for example, the conflict a genocide or ethnic cleansing, which is not true in reality. So now it's also a problem that we have this campaign of demonization of the president of Ethiopia to facilitate a kind of regime change policy based on this idea of humanitarian assistance, human rights, and democracy. So, you know, it's always the same narrative, which is going on in the Western media. And I want to remember people that this narrative just create the collapse of a lot of countries already. If you think of what is going on in Afghanistan, the invasion of Afghanistan was based on lies. We invade the country with the US, the NATO force, and so on and so forth. And with this, we make a war for 20 years. And now the country is totally destroyed. And you have 14 million people facing extreme starvation right now in Afghanistan, based on lies. So then you have Iraq war, which was also based on lies. And the country has also been destroyed. Then Syria, then Libya, and now Ethiopia. So this interference, you know, in the policy of independent country has to stop. And that's the message I want to say to the Ethiopian population and also to the Western government, that, you know, we have to stop to interfere in the affairs, domestic affairs of independent country. As we know, the president of Ethiopia was elected with the last majority, And we know that this think tank, European think tank or American think tank, are playing a bad role, you know, interfering in the process of the conflict in Ethiopia.
Thank you, Sebastian. One of the things I'm noticing, there are a lot of movements. Like one of the movements that's going on is the No More movement, supporting the Ethiopian government and the Ethiopian people. And people somewhat, are trying to make this about Black and white people, or one ethnic group against another ethnic group. And I really, want the Ethiopian population, or whoever is listening to this segment, to understand that it's really a fight between ethical outlook and unethical outlook, whether it's respecting the sovereignty of a country or not respecting the sovereignty of a country. So I really appreciate that you have touched on that, and we've had plenty of other countries. As an example, right now, as you mentioned, we have about 1 million people displaced, but then this can actually be even more. Up to 40 million could be displaced because of outside interference. So I really thank you and appreciate you for highlighting that. I want to move on to the disinformation that you mentioned. How is the disinformation affecting Ethiopia, and how is it looked at in France, for instance? What is the population in France getting? What kind of information are the mass receiving, since we have major think tanks of media sending out disinformation campaign about Ethiopia?
Yes, you have the same things in France that we have in the US, with CNN, Facebook, Twitter, all these so-called social networks, which are criminalizing the Ethiopian government. And it is the same in France. We have the same propaganda. And it's very important for the people that they know what we are talking about, because as you probably know, there was a secret meeting recently, which was made public by Sputnik News, who was organizing with former ambassador, diplomats from the US, from Britain, from the European Union, and they had a 2-hour meeting, with members of the TPLF, particularly the Mr. Beran Gebre Christos, if I pronounce it well, discussing how to organize a regime change policy in Ethiopia against the government. And there was a French guy, which is Stéphane, I have his name here, Stéphane Gompertz. And all these people for 2 hours was discussing how to step down the elected government. So it's clear that you have interference. And in this meeting, you have the former US ambassador to Somalia, which was called Donald Yamamoto. You have Vicky Alderson, who was also US Secretary of Defense for African Affairs. And what she said is that she said directly that Abiy, the president, should step down, and that there will be an all-inclusive transition government. So they are already preparing a transition government. So that's why you have all this group, this neoconservative group, with people inside the French government, inside the American government. It's not all the French government, it's not all the American government, but it's think tank, the Council of Foreign Relations, Atlantic Council, and all these people. And for example, this meeting of 2 hours, which was so-called secret, but which is now public, was organized by the Peace and Development Center, which is a so-called NGO. But in fact, when you are going on their website, you see that they are financed by the National Endowment for Democracy. And the National Endowment for Democracy is the one of George Soros. George Soros is very famous because he is behind all the regime change policy, what we call here les révolutions de couleur, color revolution, organized by the State Department. And the National Endowment for Democracy, is an extension of the CIA secret operation. Everybody know that. And they are financing this kind of discussion with officials from the European Union, former diplomats and actual diplomats of the US, Britain, European Union, discussing how they will step down the elected government. And they are talking about democracy. All around the world, they want to bring democracy to Iraq, to Afghanistan, to Libya, as I say, and to Syria. And at each time, it was just an invasion, a destruction of a country, and divide and conquer. That's why they are saying there was ethnic cleansing, it's not ethnic wars. It's not ethnic wars, It's a global policy of intervention by US State Department, by NATO, by some people in the European Union think tank, trying to divide and conquer Africa and still keep the control of what they can, in this area. But more and more, countries are standing up. Look at what's going on in Central Africa. They say no to France. They reject the policy, the predatory policy of France, and now are working with the Russian Federation. And you have Mali also now standing up against the neo-colonial policy of France, and work also with Russia to fight terrorism. And I remember that terrorism was the result of the Libya invasion that created the chaos in all the region of Sahel. So we have to stop to make this war based on so-called humanitarian assistance and bringing democracy, but we never have democracy and human rights respected. We have chaos, terrorism, divide and conquer, and it has to stop now. So that's why we have to denounce these people, either they are in the European Union, in Great Britain, in America, that they are creating the situation of chaos. They are responsible for the chaos in Ethiopia now.
Wow. Thank you, Sebastian. Well, I mean, these are some serious challenges. How are people who are really respecting other sovereignty and who really want to see democracy flourish and Africa and countries to develop, and to have great relationships with the US, UN, European Union, because like you said, not everyone in those governments are actually working against African countries or working to promote this type of really heinous agenda. So what are some of the things that we can do? I mean, I'm really hopeful already with what we're seeing. The movement is, it's really well underway. Ethiopia is being tested, but at the same time, taking the torch of, saying that we will protect the sovereignty of the country. But Ethiopia is also facing a lot of challenges. I mean, it needs a lot of support. What are, from history or from your experience, what are other opportunities to make sure that Ethiopia's sovereignty is respected and that they're able to succeed in not having to be another country like Libya and Iraq and so forth?
Yes, that's a very complex issue because, as you know, we have a cartelization of the media mainstream. So they are all in the same unilateral position in a geopolitical way of seeing the relationship between the countries in the world. So you have a conception of unilateralism, from the West, which is still today in the old paradigm, and we have a new paradigm coming now with the cooperation with China, with the Belt and Road Initiative. We know that we have 140 countries now working with China in Belt and Road Initiative, building infrastructure. You have right now in Dakar, Senegal, the forum of the cooperation between China and Africa, where there are a lot of projects. China has helped a lot Africa to develop, but we have to say, and it's not easy to say it, but we have to say that for now, Europe, the Great Britain, and United States of America are still in the former paradigm. They still think that they have to control the world, they have a hegemonic conception of the world, So they want to keep the control with AFRICOM, for example. They want to militarize Africa to keep a control and not let the Chinese and the Russians coming, you know. They are thinking in the Cold War mentality. They are still in the Cold War mentality. They are not, as you said, they are not in a win-win cooperation mentality. They don't want, for now, I mean, not everybody. Once again, in France, you have a lot of people fighting to work with Africa, to develop railroad, to develop dams, to develop ports, infrastructure, as I wrote in my book. You have a lot of people fighting in France for that. But we have to say that the elite, the financial corporation and the media, or what we call generally the industrial military complex, are still in this imperial and neo-colonial policy against most of the country in Africa.
I mean, there's a lot of, obviously, a lot of financial backing that happens with those that are pushing for those type of agendas, whether it's neocolonialism or whether it's overpowering countries like Africa or smaller Middle Eastern countries. But is mass mobilization and educating the mass helping? Is it going to change history, basically? Because like you said, some people are stuck in the Cold War mentality, and you know, we need to awaken the new generation, the new people who are open-minded, to actually create partnership instead of overpowering. Do you think it's feasible?
Yes, it's totally feasible. As I say, it has already started with a lot of young people. You have a lot of young people in Africa. And the revolution in Mali, I was in Mali in January. Most of the revolution against the old system was coming from the young generation, because they are fed up with this imperial neo-colonial policy, and they stand up, they remove the president, and now they have a transition team working for the people and with the people. So it's very interesting what's going on in Mali, what we have seen also in Central Africa. And also you have also, as you have probably seen in Burkina Faso and Niger.
Niger, yeah.
Yes, Niger, with the young generation standing up also against this neo-colonial policy imposed by the Western politician. So I'm quite optimistic, you know, about what is going on in Africa, even if the situation is very bad in a lot of this country. When you are going in Mali, for example, the population is very poor, it's very sad. But the younger generation is now standing up, fighting for real development, for real infrastructural program. And that's why Ethiopia is very important, because Ethiopia has a very well-known industrial policy. You know, everybody knows about the train between Djibouti and Addis Ababa. Everybody knows about the Great Dam, the Renaissance Dam. Everybody knows about the satellite, which was launched in 2019. And the policy of developing science for the youth. So I think something is happening now in Africa, with a lot of countries standing up for their real sovereignty. And of course it's feasible. And you have a lot of medias also. And I think a part of the solution is to have more and more Pan-African media. I'm always making interviews also in Afrique Media, for example, with a Pan-African TV, trying to challenge the neo-imperial policy of the West by educating the African. So, and it's a very effective platform to discuss this issue. So I think this kind of media that you have, this Afrique Media and other media, are now doing a good job, at least, to educate the population against this imperial policy.
Great. Thank you, Sebastian. So I know you are, you focus a lot on economic development in Africa. What are the economic impacts? I mean, we already see the economic impacts of the war and of, you know, Ethiopia is losing several Western support that she's had, whether it's through Aid Forum or through incentives. How do you see Ethiopia recovering, and what are some of your points that you can make? Do you think a leader such as Dr. Abiy Ahmed, who is currently undergoing campaign to be isolated, can overcome the challenges?
If my position is from the future, as I say, I wrote this book about the future of Africa. So the real way to achieve peace is through real economical development. That's why it's very sad what is going on in Ethiopia, that we are trying to destabilize this country. Because as I say, Ethiopia has a real industrial policy with industrial park, with creating jobs for the people, with infrastructures, with education in science and technology, as I say, in space technology. I know also that they are looking for development of nuclear energy in the future. So I mean the real solution, and I think what fear the most the oligarchical power, this imperialist, is that this policy of development. And I think that's why Ethiopia is under attack now, because Ethiopia has a real economical, industrial development policy, independent and sovereign development policy with partners. And we have to say it, for example, Macron, our president, was in Ethiopia, it was 2 years ago, and he visited the beautiful site of Lalibela with the beautiful church, And during this visit, there was the president of the CNES, which is the National Center of Space Studies. And we know that there is a project to build an astronomical site in Lalibela, another one with the Mount Antonto one, to have an astronomical observatory. And I think that's what France has to work on, not, playing this divide and conquer policy, but help Ethiopia to work. When Ethiopia has decided to have a space policy, very interesting space policy, France can help to develop that, to train in a university. We are very competent in this area. So I think what France has to do is to help Ethiopia, not to divide, but to help to build this industrial and go on this industrial policy. And we can play a good role if we do that, because as I said, peace will only be achieved by the real industrial development policy. And I think that's why Ethiopia is under attack now.
Great. Sebastian, for our last discussion point, I wanted to ask you, how do you advocate in France, for instance, for this cause that you believe in supporting African countries, including Ethiopia, build a relationship that's based on diplomacy, based on a partnership, and development. How do you advocate for that in France? And what are the responses that you get from the administration, or because maybe many of us around the world do not understand the details on advocacy when it comes to different countries. For instance, with the US, there's a lot of information, but with France, the audiences might not be aware. So how do you advocate, and is there a good advocacy campaign within France to encourage the administration towards a better policy?
It's a challenge. Well, of course, we will have this interview. We wrote article on my website about what is going on really in Ethiopia. We have published this book regarding the future of Ethiopia and how is a model for development. And we are pushing France. We support, as I said, we support the President Macron when he was there, saying that we will help to develop space policy or have different projects. But unfortunately, it's the problem we have with our president now, is that he's going everywhere, making very beautiful speech and promises, but sometimes there is no concrete action behind. So we have to go on to push in the right direction, and also put pressure on this government to respect, and I repeat, to respect the sovereignty of other countries. That's very important, because we cannot, in all the media in France, you cannot imagine every day you have attacks against China, against Russia, that they are interfering in other country policy. And we are always screaming and crying that they are doing that, but which is most of the time is not true. But we are doing exactly the same thing. So we are trying to put pressure on this government to know the truth, to denounce, this. For example, it was very important that the secret meeting was revealed in the media to be able to show that you have forces, think tank, and neoconservative groups trying to push for regime change policy. So we have to make it public, tell it as much as people as we can, and put pressure on the government to understand that it's not the right way to respect the sovereignty of an independent country where a president has been elected by a majority of its people, as it was done in Ethiopia in the last election.
Great. Sebastian, what's you want to tell the audience the title of your book, and so that Ethiopians will be able to get the book, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, it is in French. I don't know.
Well, we have a lot of French-speaking people in Ethiopia. Thanks.
Is what I would say. I know that Ethiopia and France has worked a lot together during all the time. So yes, I know that some people are speaking French. So my book is Voir l'Afrique avec les yeux du futur, which is See Africa with the eyes of the future. And a part of his book is dedicated to Ethiopia industrial policy. So that's my message of hope. See the future. See how you will continue to develop your industrial policy, and see how you can, because I cannot interfere in your domestic affairs, but how we can stop as quickly as possible this conflict, which is fueled by outside, and restoring peace and create a unity, because this so-called ethnic, dispute is always played by the West. Always they are using these ethnic things to play people one against each other. So understand that Ethiopia is a great country. It has a great history of resistance, which is the only country which has not been colonized by the imperial powers. So go back to this unity, go back to this industrial policy, and we will see that it will be very helpful, not only for the Ethiopia, but for all the continent.
Great. Thank you, Sebastian. I really appreciate you taking your precious time and joining us at Prime Media. Prime Media audiences, thank you for joining us. I will be back with another guest, and I will see you until then. Thank you.